Hello. I reckon politicians are overpaid and out of touch. At Victorian Socialists, we think the base salary for politicians should be no more than a sixth-year nurse, which is currently just over $92,000. And any increases to this salary should be pegged to the Nurses Award. We also want to force MPs to divest themselves of any direct stock market or other financial and trading market investments as a condition of taking office. We chose a nurse's salary because that's pretty close to the average full-time worker in Australia. The median salary for a full-time worker, meaning 50% of workers earn less and 50% earn more, is a bit over $88,000, while the average, which is distorted by a minority of high-income earners like politicians, is around $102,000. Yesterday I shared this information about our policy to put politicians on an average worker's wage, and I wanted to explain a bit more about that and respond to some of the objections and questions that people raised. The policy itself is pretty straightforward. Politicians currently get a base salary of $230,000, which puts them in the top 5% of Australian income earners, and ministers get more than $350,000, putting them in the top 1%. On top of these already exorbitant salaries, they get heaps of benefits like a travel allowance, which lets them claim $310 per night spent in Canberra for Parliament, even if they stay in their own house while they're there. And pretty much, we think this is too much. We think that it should be cut back down to something resembling an average full-time worker's wage. And among the reasons for this is that if politicians had to live more like the rest of us, they might think differently about the decisions that they make in Parliament. Another reason behind the decision, and more specifically the decision to tie it to a nurse's wage, is that the amount that public sector nurses earn ultimately the decision lies with the politicians themselves in each of the states and territories. So if a politician theoretically wanted a higher wage, they'd have to increase a nurse's wage first. To show that we're serious about this policy, myself and other all VS candidates, have made a pledge that if elected, we'll only accept $92,000 out of our salary and donate the rest, which is around $140,000, into local campaigns to make our communities a better place for working class people. So yeah, that's the policy basically, and now I want to talk about some of the objections that people had about it. Firstly, a few people commented about how the workers' movement historically fought for parliamentary salaries in 19th century Britain, and that is correct, this did happen. The thing is though, we're not saying that politicians shouldn't be paid at all, which is how it was back then, because not paying politicians at all definitely would mean, as it did then, that it wouldn't be a very viable thing for working class people to aspire to. You could only be a politician in that case if you actually came from money. What we're saying is that politicians should be paid an average worker's wage, specifically a bit over the median full-time worker's wage of $88,000. It's a pretty strange argument to make about politicians in the context of 19th century Britain, to say that working class people couldn't get by as politicians earning only $92,000 when a majority of the working class are on less than that now. When the Chartists demanded parliamentary salaries, they didn't demand that those salaries should put politicians in the absolute top level of income earners. They were fighting for politicians to be paid a livable wage, which is probably something that resembles what our policy argues for. Another statement that was raised was that politicians actually deserve to be in the top 5% of income earners because their job is very hard and stressful. And here's an example of one of those, and I quote, "It's a pretty shit job at times. Someone is always upset with you. Even when you do your best, you have to give up a lot of privacy and the job requires you to work all kinds of hours." And I just want to quote here an excellent reply that someone gave in the comment section. Ex-hospo worker here. Can confirm that someone is always upset at you, even when you try your best, work all kinds of hours, get doxed by the creep you wouldn't go out with, $18.70 an hour. Millions of workers in this country are doing work that is just as hard and stressful as what politicians do for less than half of what politicians are getting paid. Just because being a politician can be hard and stressful at times doesn't mean the financial reward should be more than 95% of other workers. Another argument that people made is that politicians need to be paid a lot so that Parliament can attract the most talented people. And here's an example of that argument on X. Nonce. The salary needs to be properly paid to try and attract good people from the private sector. Another person said, "I want our best and brightest as politicians, and you just make so much more in other industries without copping a bucket of shit from the public, so I'm happy with their wages going up if it means the dumbest cunts on earth get replaced by incredible brains." The issue with this is that there is absolutely zero evidence that higher salaries mean you'll attract better, more talented people. The absolute worst people in Australia are billionaires like Clive Palmer and Gina Rinehart. The head of banks and other big businesses earning multi-million-dollar salaries are all anti-working class scum. The fact that the prospect of being in the top 5% of income earners, with all the massive perks on top of that, and the prospect of a lifetime of lucrative appointments in the private sector and a huge parliamentary pension hasn't exactly resulted in a wealth of talent among our current crop of parliamentarians is further evidence. Ralph Babet is a senator, for example, and he's a fucking real estate agent. The most genuinely talented, creative, and energetic people aren't usually the people who are in it for the money. They're the people who have a genuine passion for something and are prepared to work in those jobs, even if it doesn't result in massive financial rewards. And politics is probably the worst thing of all to get into with the expectation of significant financial reward. It means you're more likely to be thinking more of yourself and your personal prospects than the people that you're supposed to be serving. No one really does big things for the money. We want politicians to stand up to the powerful vested interests that dominate politics today and work to build a better society here in this country and a better world. You're probably unlikely to do that if you're the kind of person who would rather be a real estate agent, a banker, or a lawyer instead because you're making better money. And this relates to the third main objection that people raised, that paying politicians less will make them more susceptible to bribery and corruption. One person says, politicians should be susceptible to corporate donations isn't the take I thought I'd hear from socialists. And another says, it's important that politicians are paid extremely well so that money has less of an effect on politics. I want to ask those people, what is it about the state of the world today that makes you think that earning a lot of money is actually protection against corruption? If anything, the opposite is the case. The higher you go up on the income scale, all the way to billionaires like Reinhardt and Donald Trump, the more likely you are to engage in the various dodgy and corrupt practices to further boost your wealth. And again, it isn't like the massive salaries we pay them now has been any protection. Politicians are already in the pockets of fossil fuel companies and other major lobbyists, and if they earned even more and were even more integrated into the elite world of the Australian ruling class, they'd be only more likely to be subservient to their interests. So yeah, ultimately, none of those objections really stack up in my opinion. But I do want to finish on a positive note. It's clear that a lot of people love this policy. They're the kind of people who work hard day in, day out in stressful, massively underpaid jobs and are sick of politicians lecturing workers about the need for wage constraint when they're earning hundreds of thousands of dollars and then passing tax cuts for billionaires and big corporations. One legend said, "Fifth year midwife/nurse here. Every dollar that goes into my bank account, I know I've worked hard for, serving my community and looking after those most vulnerable. What a joy it would be to have someone in Parliament doing the same." These are the kind of people this policy is for, and the people I'll be fighting for in Parliament if I'm elected in a few weeks' time.